Derek Waltchack here, coming to you from Consensus 2018. Really excited. One of my favorite themes and favorite areas in crypto to invest in are in stablecoins. I just think it's going to be a really big field. Its use case is potentially even bigger than crypto itself. So just full disclosure, I'm an investor in this project. I believe in it, but we're going to go into all the details. So I've got Kain Warwick with me here with Havven. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks very much for having us on the show. I'm Kain, the founder of Havven, and we're a decentralized payment network.
All right, so you're a stablecoin. Some of our listeners may have no concept of what that actually means. Why don't you explain to us what a stablecoin is?
So I think generally stablecoins are intended to track some external value. Typically it's the US dollar. It can be gold, it can be other things, but the idea is that because crypto assets are very volatile, you want something that can essentially allow people to have a unit of account that is stable. And that's going to enable a whole bunch of things within crypto that right now are very hard to do. So long-term contracts, insurance, lending, etc. It's very hard because if you're lending Ethereum or Bitcoin, it can get really ugly really fast. So you want something that's going to be stable that you can use within those systems. So that's the idea of a stablecoin. That's what we're trying to solve, to create essentially what Bitcoin was supposed to be, a cash system, right? So you need stability if you want to build a cash system.
Yeah, and I think that's something that people, once they kind of get into crypto and they start to understand, and they think Bitcoin can be this thing that you use instead of cash, but the volatility is amazing, down 70% from the peak last year, and that you could either be to the good or to the bad in that type of situation. And some argue that eventually Bitcoin will reach such a critical mass that the price swings will be sort of like gold, which might be 10 to 15% a year, but we're not there yet. So therefore the need for stablecoins. So why don't you tell us about the different types of stablecoins and the way that stablecoins try to keep their peg to the dollar?
So broadly, there's three categories of stablecoins. A lot of people would have heard of Tether. So Tether is an off-chain collateral solution. So the idea being that you take dollars, you put them on deposit in a bank somewhere, and against each dollar you issue a token. That's the most viable solution we have right now, but obviously it's not very decentralized. So that's a very centralized solution. You've got a single point of failure, one entity or one company or one group of people that's administering, in the case of Tether, it's $2.5 billion. So, the challenge there is that if a government or regulator decides that that's not a good idea, it could potentially be shut down, which hasn't happened yet, but, it's a risk that people assume. So Digix is another example of that. They use gold. And then the second category is on-chain collateral. The best example of which, that's trading right now is Maker. So Maker uses, at the moment, Ethereum. That you can stake Ether into a CDP, a collateralized debt position, and issue a stablecoin against it. And then the third one, which is still very theoretical, is algorithmic solutions. So Basis and a number of other projects, Carbon, are trying to work on essentially a non-collateralized, just managing the supply to maintain the price. So those are the three categories at the moment that are sort of viable.
We'll get into yours specifically, obviously, but the algorithmic is interesting to me because it's almost like if it can work, you get a free lunch. You don't really have to back it with anything. It's the math, which essentially is what the central bank does here in the United States and elsewhere around the world. Do you have any thoughts on that as a model?
So I think it's the most challenging one to solve. I have a view. If you go back to pre-Bitcoin days, a lot of people were skeptical that we would be able to solve the double spend problem. And then all of a sudden someone was able to put together a whole bunch of different aspects of technology that was kind of in existence into a system in Bitcoin that allowed for, decentralized consensus, which was pretty amazing. But when you look back at it, you can kind of trace back the history and you can kind of see that in some ways it was inevitable. But when you look at an algorithmic solution to stability, it's easy to kind of dismiss it and say it's not possible, it can't work. But people who dismiss things and say they can't work on principle, unless you can demonstrate that it is not actually possible, it's a bad side of the bet to be on often. Because where there's a lot of incentive for people to build something, oftentimes it'll get built. So it's really a sort of academic question at the moment. Is this a thing that is possible to happen? And I'm skeptical of people who sort of dismiss it out of hand. I think it's going to be a very challenging problem, and it's going to take a while. So for us, being on-chain collateral, our view is path to market is much, much simpler. It'll be much faster. And if we're able to get in market, scale fast, we can potentially put enough distance between ourselves and the algorithmic solutions that it'll be hard for them to catch up in the same way that it's hard for people to catch up to Tether at the moment.
Right. So I wonder, what does Tether think about you guys?
I think the guys from Tether, obviously they've been doing this for a long time. It's a system that works very well for the people who participate in it. And even though there's some skepticism around whether it's collateralized or not, I'm very confident that it is. We work with market makers and a whole bunch of people that, I don't think there's any issue with it being collateralized, but it is still risky. It is still centralized. I think they look at us, all of the stablecoins, and kind of go, come back to us when you've actually got something real in market that can challenge us.
Right. And that's probably fair. Very good. Okay, so we talked about the algorithmic side. We understand just inherently with Tether, the way it's backed by the dollar. So go into a little bit of your mechanism and how that actually works, and how you try to keep the peg and the couple different coins that you have to be able to do that.
So our view is that stability is obviously important, but scalability is critical as well. So what we're looking to do is build a scalable solution because, again, Tether has $2.5 billion in circulating currency. So unless we can get to several hundred million or $1 billion in circulating currency, it's going to be difficult to get exchanges and other systems to utilize us. So what we've built is something sort of akin to a closed-loop payment network. So we have two tokens. There's a collateral token and then a stable coin which is issued against the collateral token. So what happens is people hold the collateral token and they lock it up in a smart contract, and against the value of the collateral token we issue the stable coins, and stable coins are then transacted and fees are charged for the transactions. So in our case, there is no free lunch here. People do have to pay for the utility that they're getting from the system, but our view is that the fees that are being generated by the payment network will allow the system to scale much faster. So what we've seen with Maker is obviously, the limiting factor on scalability for them is getting people to put ETH into these CDPs. And right now they're sitting at about 35 million in circulating currency. So it's hard to incentivize people to stake their ETH. So they're looking at other solutions to help them to scale. In our side, really it's about transaction volume. If there's enough transaction volume in the system, then we'll be able to scale much faster and get up to, essentially hundreds of millions or even potentially billions of dollars in circulating currency. So that's the mechanism, I guess, at a high level.
All right, so you have the Haven token, the HAV, and that would be the collateral token, and then you have what are called nomins. And right now you have an e-nomin, and then go through that a little bit.
Sure. So one of the things we wanted to do before we got on mainnet was to test out some of the mechanism aspects. So we built an ETH-backed stablecoin to allow us to test transaction fees and a few other things. So that is, I guess, a provisional stablecoin, if you will, which will be kind of mothballed in the next month or so. But we're right now, in fact, we just last night went into code freeze. So the contracts are being audited for NUSD, which is the Haven-backed Nomen system. So once we launch on mainnet on the 11th of June, the foundation, the Haven Foundation, will be able to stake the Havens, the value of the Havens that we have in our wallet, and issue NUSD, which is a Nomen that's tracking the US dollar, which will give us, at the moment, based on the current price, probably a couple $1 million worth of circulating currency, which will then allow transaction fees to start to be generated. And we've got a whole bunch of real-world, examples and adoption that we're working on to generate that transaction volume.
Okay. So you'll create the foundation will actually create those. So for the people who are holding the HAV tokens, at what point will they be allowed to lock them up in a smart contract and actually be able to generate fees?
Yeah, it's probably going to be a few months after that. One of the things that we've kind of, I guess, as a principle implemented since the beginning, is just being very careful with the system and ensuring that we roll it out in a staged fashion. So we don't want people to be able to put their havens at risk until we're confident that the system is viable. So the foundation's going to take that risk initially. It's probably going to be a few months before we can allow everyone to issue havens. In principle, they can from a technical perspective, but just from a practical rollout perspective, we try to stage it.
Right. All right. So if you're creating a stablecoin, one of the problems you have to solve is how do you keep your peg? First of all, you got to be able to determine what is the U.S. dollar worth, and so you use an oracle, which is a seer that tries to find that. What's your oracle system? How do you do that?
So at the moment, that's one of the most centralized aspects of the system. And, there are a number of projects, Oracleize it, and a few others that are working on decentralized Oracle solutions. There's shelling coins and a few other very sort of technical approaches. So this is something that, again, in our sort of staged rollout, we're going to be looking to decentralize over time. So right now it's a centralized Oracle. It pulls a price feed from various places where there's liquidity and is able to then send to the contract the value of havens against ETH and the US dollar, once every few minutes.
Okay. All right, so that makes sense. So, so one of the critical things is obviously for you to be successful, a lot of people need to use your, your stablecoin, right, for it to work. Okay, so what is going to drive that use? I was listening to a podcast with Kyle Samani with Multicoin Capital, and he was talking about how he's a believer in stablecoins. I don't think he's invested with y'all, but he's looking, and he's trying to figure out which one he thinks is going to work. And what he said was he didn't think it was necessarily the algorithm or the actual way that the stablecoin works will be the deciding factor. He thinks that eventually everybody will figure out what mechanism works and you can fork it and just copy that mechanism. But what's going to drive this is adoption. And it's going to be, the way he described it as a world-class SaaS sales force that gets out there and does that. And I think your background, you have background in retail and some of the other stuff that you've done prior. What is your plan on going to market and driving adoption?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, again, you need to phase these things, right? So on one hand, the low-hanging fruit for us are crypto projects. So we're partnering with a number of crypto projects that are looking for a stable medium of exchange within their platform. And then from there, you can start to expand into some real-world use cases. So as a proof of concept, we've actually built an e-commerce store where you can go and buy Haven merchandise, like Haven shirts and hoodies and things like that. But we've also partnered with a third-party logistics company that distributes Apple products. Right. So we've got a competition that launched last night where if you make a purchase through the Haven store, you can go in the draw essentially to win EUSD. And you can buy iPhones, you can buy AirPods, a bunch of Apple products. So that, for us, is really important to demonstrate for merchants the value of accepting cryptocurrency, because I think a lot of them have been hearing about Bitcoin as a solution for payments for a long time, and they've become very skeptical of cryptocurrency because people don't like to spend Bitcoin because it's deflationary, so they'd rather hold it and wait for the price appreciation. And on the flip side, if you're a merchant and you're accepting it, there's counterparty risk on the exchange rate. If you're a low margin business and you accept Bitcoin as a payment, and the price drops 2 or 3%, which can happen over the course of a few hours, you either need to have very good hedging, which is expensive, or you need to accept that currency fluctuation risk. So a stable coin that has all the benefits of crypto, but doesn't have that counterparty risk or minimizes the counterparty risk, I think there's going to need to be a re-education process for merchants. So we want to show them this actually works. You can reduce fraud massively. You can take out a whole bunch of costs. And we're actually doing it now to demonstrate to them that this is a thing. So, right. Yeah.
So you, was that difficult to get the Apple products? I noticed, it's, and is there a price discount or is it the same price you pay at the Apple store? How does that work?
Yeah, so at the moment it's the same price, but we are looking at potentially running some discounts to encourage people to buy. Obviously, the competition right now is one sort of approach to get people to test out the store and generate some volume. We have I guess we're probably a more commercial team than we are a technical team. I've been running a company called Blue Shift for the last 4 years, which is in Australia a fiat to crypto payment gateway. So we've got a really solid team there. We've got a lot of good relationships with both crypto and real world businesses. So we've been able to leverage a lot of those relationships to get things like this over the line. So
obviously you're based in Australia. How is that as a challenge, and then how is that a benefit when you're trying to launch a worldwide currency like this?
The obvious challenge is that, we're in New York, right? So we travel a lot. We've been on the road for the last, 2 or 3 weeks. We've been through Singapore, SF, New York, we're going to be in Korea and China later in the year. So there's a lot of travel, because, Australia is very far away. The closest flight for us is really like Singapore, which is 8 hours, right? So that's a short flight for us. So that's just one, I guess, geographic challenge. Although, crypto is a very distributed community, right? So there's people all over the world. So getting attention, getting cut through, you end up spending a lot of time at conferences and things like that. The flip side of Australia is that, sovereign risk is very low. It's a very stable government. The regulatory environment is very stable. So that reduces some of the risk, I guess, of, any regulatory issues we have with building something like this. I think that, if you're building stablecoin in the US, you have to potentially contend with, scrutiny from the SEC and a bunch of different agencies. You've got all the state-based regulations. So, in Australia, we've got a sort of federalized system. We have one sort of set of laws that we have to deal with. It makes it a lot easier for us to operate, this network.
And I was reading, I think it was yesterday, where the Australian government, I don't know where they are in making this law, but they basically said you can't use cash for purchases larger than $10,000. So tell us about that, and then could that possibly be a benefit to what you're doing?
So, I think it's interesting. Australia still has about 30% of transactions are still done in cash. And Blue Shift is actually a cash payment gateway. So it allows people to bring cash into a location and convert it into crypto over the counter. We obviously, because it's cash, we tend to do smaller transactions, around $2,000 or $3,000. So it's not going to necessarily affect us. But I think the intention is to really try and reduce people coming in and say, buying a $2 million house with a couple of briefcases full of cash. The question, with any regulation like this is, will it actually impede legitimate business more than, the people who are doing illegitimate things? Because most times those people will route around they're not going to stop doing what they're doing just because you say it's not okay anymore. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Again, the regulators in Australia have been fairly hands-off with crypto, so I don't think it's necessarily aimed at crypto. I think it's just an effort to try and curb some of the excesses of cash payments that have been happening for a while.
And I guess my question is based in the idea that this would be a cryptocurrency that's a stablecoin that you could track better than you could cash. Absolutely. So could you potentially could Havven benefit from this law?
I think we could benefit from the law. So it's probably worth describing the Havven sort of governance system. So we're a foundation, a not-for-profit foundation that operates out of Australia, and it's a protocol. So we value decentralization and censorship resistance very highly. And our view is that if you want to be a viable, scalable stablecoin, you need to use the same approach to governance as close as possible to things like Bitcoin, right? If we have a system where there's a central point of failure, like for example Tether, I don't think we'll be able to scale. So for us, we've open sourced the software. Anyone can come and work on it. We're looking to build a community around it, and we want to ensure that even if we disappear, that the project will be able to continue to grow. But obviously, in the early days, there's a lot of work for us to actually advocate and build up the network effects. But ultimately, we want this to be a project that is open source and anyone can work on and is available to anyone to use.
Okay, 2 more questions. First one, any other aspect of Havven that we didn't discuss or touch on that you'd like to shine a light on?
I think we've covered the majority of it. I mean, again, there's one of the critical things for people to understand is this dual token mechanism, because it is a bit different than a lot of other projects where they've just got a single token. So the idea that you can hold havens and that the havens give you a right to participate in this network and get rewarded with fees is really important. So the collateral token is a free floating token. The price can go up and down. It's the stablecoin that's issued against that value, and ultimately the value of the stablecoin is in its convertibility to the underlying asset. So this is why I think in the short term, collateralized solutions will be far more effective and far easier to implement, because you're basically taking an asset and saying that you can convert this stablecoin into that asset. If the asset maintains its value, which for us is really determined by transaction volume in the network. So if transaction volume is happening, then the system should be very stable. So that's probably the most critical thing for people to get, is that there are two tokens and that they have two different sort of functions within the network.
Yeah, I was noticing in your Telegram group that as of today, as of this recording, which is the 15th of May, the price of Haven is around 67, 68 cents. And so you're getting close to $1, and people are thinking the HAV token is the stable coin, and they're like, well, why isn't it $1? Or will it stop at $1? And again, the HAV token is actually the collateral token that essentially, when you lock it up, it'll create nomins. So you want to look at the nomins when it's out, and that you hope that does stay at $1, because that's the goal. Okay, so I assume you'll come back to consensus next year. Okay, so what would be some good yardsticks or some good milestones where, if we're sitting here, we're doing this again a year from now, that you've accomplished maybe X, Y, and Z? What are some things we could try to hold you to?
So obviously mainnet launch on the 11th of June is a critical milestone. Then there's going to be a phased rollout, which will take probably 4 or 5 stages every few months. So by the time we get to this time next year, May next year, I think what we should be looking for is a system that has scaled up to support hopefully a few $100 million worth of circulating currency. I think we'll also have multiple currencies in place. So we'll have obviously USD as the initial stablecoin, but in our market in Australia, it's very important that you've got an Australian dollar tracking stablecoin as well. One of the nice things about a collateralized system is you can actually measure that collateral in any fiat currency. So we can support Korean won, we can support RMB, we can support yen, euros, GBP, and we can support them simultaneously. So one of the really strong use cases eventually, once we get to a level of circulating currency to support this, will be overseas remittance, to allow people to convert very easily and for low fees various currencies into one another. So yeah.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for your time, Kain. This has been great. Honestly, I've wanted to do this for a long time. So, good luck with the rest of the show. Okay.
Monuments crumble in the blink of an eye. The easy river has just run dry. In a house of cards, I feel the breeze wound so tight I can barely